There we go.
I think his name is Mike.
Hi, Mike, can you hear us?
Hi, can you hear us?
Hello?
Hi.
Marina, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Can you hear us?
Yes, yes, we can.
Great.
All right, I think we'll get started here in just a minute.
Okay.
Whenever the
I'm
chair
going
is
to
ready.
start to share my screen.
No, sir. I've got enough of that. No, whenever you're ready.
Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Great. Okay.
Given that the seats are now full, we should start our hearing presentation. I pass this to Stephen.
Thank you. Well, Marina, we I think are all in attendance as far as the Planning Commission is concerned. We have some folks from the public here, all anxiously awaiting your presentation. So whenever you're ready.
Okay, great. Thank you. So I'm Marina with DPZ, and I'm delighted to be here. And I'm joined by Mike White from my firm, from DPZ. And I'm also joined by Alex Navarro from Jacobs, Aaron Crabtree from Crabtree Group, Aaron Cook from Crabtree Group, Giorgio Tachev from GIT. So they'll be speaking, well, I'll move to this slide real quick. The presentation is going to go as follows. First, a very brief discussion of the existing conditions assessment that we've done, because this is our first sort of formal presentation to you. Then going to explain the growth management scenarios, and then we'll move into transportation, capital improvement and infrastructure, conservation and coastal management, and then the fiscal productivity of place types. I think we're also joined by Travis Peterson, who is from Impact Campaigns, who is the one tasked with helping with community engagement. So I'm going to run through this. It'll probably take an hour for the whole team to present. But if you have burning questions, please interrupt me, and we're happy to discuss it. Otherwise, we'll go through it and then stay as long as you want for the Q&A. So in terms of the existing conditions, we worked with Gridix. That's an intelligent zoning platform for the digital zoning and mapping analysis. And we found it very useful. And the county staff has access to this platform as well. So I'm sure they can give you all access to it so you can play around with it. Your code and zoning map were integrated into Gridix platform for sort of ease of review and reference and our analysis. And here you see a few images that show the 3D maps with the zones on it, the existing flue layers, as well as the actual zoning text to show that that tool is actually available. And then there's a filter tool, and that tool is very helpful in helping to isolate the information we needed, such as sometimes what are the number of buildings per plot, how many plots are built to capacity, where are the villas located, etc. So we were able to generate these kinds of maps during our visioning workshop, which show some additional filtering. So for example, looking at the distribution chart of number of parcels per planning area, you can see the number of residential units per area, or how the zoning is distributed across planning areas. So it was helpful in really helping to understand why the county looks the way it does. And I'm going to show this later and explain it, but we're proposing a new map called a sector map. And this is sort of a draft, a first pass, because we've begun to digitize it already. But essentially, it's a planning tool used to define large geographic areas and their propensity for development for the county. And for Walton County, we identified 3 sectors of preservation, maintenance, and growth. And I'll describe this, but I wanted to show that it's now sort of being digitized. Now, what will not be news to you is that we found a lot of similarities, or rather few noticeable differences in built form across certain zoning categories. We did this for the rural and conservation residential areas, and here you see the different mixed-use centers that generally all permit the same level of density but may differ in FAR or possible unit types. It gets confusing because you can't accurately predict what the future development outcome on a parcel is. And it led us to ask, are all 4 of these categories needed? Are there opportunities where we can consolidate some of these parcels? And sometimes even in the county, there's a few of these zoning categories that are assigned on only less than 10 parcels. Sometimes there's a few of your zoning and flu that are assigned on actually 2 parcels. So we're recommending merging those into new ones or actually deleting them and replacing them with something else to better reflect what's on the ground. Now, this is it's difficult to read. It's not intended for you to read it, but it's the example of the analysis we did that shows first what are the flu categories, what's the intent of the flu category, because that's always very important. What are all the zoning categories that fit within this, the flu category, the density, the FAR, its intent as well, comments we had about it, and then our recommendations, which are all built into the report. This with county staff. This is also an example of your very unusual zoning, which explains a lot of why you look the way you do. It's haphazard in many places. There are obvious fixes that can be done, like, for example, the town center, 1 parcels that are encroaching into conservation, and a small conservation encroaching where the town center could be. It's intriguing. We wanted to try to reconcile this where we could. And at the top, you see this confetti-like assignment of small neighborhood infill, or residential preservation, each with different zoning regulations. It doesn't necessarily help reinforce the character of the area. And we know that, for example, Chat Holly has a lot of different characters. And there needs to be a holistic understanding of what the place needs to look like. And even though neighborhood infill in and of itself is a good idea, as its name implies, it should not only have one standard assigned to it, since it's intended to be compatible with the adjacent context. This is another map that was generated by Gridix, which was very interesting for us because it shows that actually 20% of the parcels in the county are actually built to capacity. And we had to ask ourselves why that is. So many are probably unbuilt due to a combination of market limitations, infrastructure constraints, a lot of the zoning barriers, and maybe just property owners sitting on their land. So while the zoning may allow for greater density, certain factors like high development costs and so on and so forth have made full build out either impractical or undesirable. We also took each of your 10 comp plan elements, the policies in each of the elements, and suggested whether they should remain as is, change a little, or change a lot. Very few deletions. And while we are recommending changes, those are included in the column at the right. It's highly technical. It may be boring for many people, but it helped at least our team zero in on the most pertinent issues to be addressed. And generally, we found that the policies say the right things, but evidently the zoning is not yielding the same results. So we made recommendations based on that to move forward. So that's a very general overview of the existing conditions. You'll hear a little bit about it from our consultants in terms of the transportation and the others. So what are we proposing to be incorporated? We had into your comp plan. I'm going to go and move into that presentation now. Now, so you can grow more logically and sensibly, and where it makes sense to grow, and you're going to continue growing, of course, right? You've reaped the benefits that have come from fast growth, as well as the challenges that have come from it. And we've been made aware of those in detail. Not only the number of people who live here, the University of Florida's numbers are there. So there's about 84,000 people living there now. They anticipate that by 2040, anywhere from 110 to 140,000 people. So we try to work with the average. But then there's also the tourism impact. Last time we were there, Public Works Up, one of the gentlemen who was in attendance asked us, well, what about the tourism impact? And it is significant. 5.3 million annual visitors, 6.9 in total economic impact, of course, with 4.8 in direct spending, and 44% of that allocated to beach nourishment and infrastructure. So that's some of the good news. Obviously, the counties use a lot of that money to reinvest in upgrading systems, improving beach access, purchasing more beach access, operating a jitney to the public beaches. And we understand that it's sometimes very hard to identify what the parking impacts may be or what the impact on some of the roads would be from a tourism standpoint because it fluctuates so much. But we're cognizant of that, I should say. Now, what was interesting to us is that half the county is already zoned for place types. So we leaned into that strategy as we think it's the right one for the county. And the difference between place types and land use is that place types are essentially future land uses, but they're defined by their character, by their intensity of development, as well as their mobility goals. And of course, when the trust plan was done in 1996, it began to identify those place types. So you can see here, the pink categories are already identifying place types, and the yellow categories are identifying land uses. So we're trying to reconcile them. And so we began to do an assessment of the county and to really begin to identify what are the place types that exist. And so we're proposing the assignment of place types into your future land framework, but little by little. We think that what we're going to show you today really does reflect the existing patterns already that exist in the county. We've simply just given them names. And we're going to review every single one of these with you and to show you how they can be applied. As I mentioned, it builds on the foundation of the 1996 trust plan, but we've evolved it to better reflect the existing conditions on the ground. And more importantly, to begin to support the transitions between coherent, recognizable, well-structured places. So there are essentially four place type categories, I should say, and not all of them need to be mapped, only those highlighted in pink. So we've identified center, community or settlement types, corridor types, and special types. And so what do we mean when I say only the pink ones need to be designated? We don't have to designate where your urban, rural, or suburban corridors are. One approach could be just designate where we want urban corridors, which is going to be where walkability is actively encouraged and, future growth is anticipated. The rural and the natural corridors are going to be easy to map because they essentially follow existing rural or natural areas. And then all of the other corridors, for example, could default to suburban corridors until they're ready to transition to urban corridors, or unless the county identifies where urban corridors should be located to and map those proactively. And I'll show you I'm going to show you what each of these look like. So in the center, there are two types, urban and rural. In the settlement or community types, there's the T&D, the traditional neighborhood development. There's a village settlement, rural settlement, and then the suburban settlement. In the corridor types, it's also urban, rural, natural, and suburban. And in your special place types, you have a lot because you are so unique. But there's Eglin, of course, which isn't going to change. There's a potential for a TOD or industrial. There's agricultural, and there are all your conservation types. And here's an example of the incredible wealth of your conservation types. There are the parks and recreation, from the state forest, the state parks, the beaches, the dune lakes, the conservation land, and of course the agriculture. And those are they're not difficult to identify because it's very clear where these are. And many of them are already mapped anyways. Your comprehensive plan actually includes strong policies already related to conservation and coastal management, which provides already a solid foundation for applying those designations effectively. And our team is proposing certain enhancements to those policies. Now, where do the differences lie? They lie, for example, in the difference between urban and suburban corridors. Urban corridors, of course, feature buildings fronting wide tree-lined sidewalks with parking located in the rear, creating a more walkable and inviting environment. Most visitors and residents tend to like these places and visit them often and linger in them. In contrast, the suburban corridors, also useful, typically have parking lots between the buildings and the street. If sidewalks exist at all, they're generally less accommodating to pedestrians and cyclists. The county has both and will continue to do so, but where opportunities arise to promote stronger urban frontages or more pedestrian-friendly frontages, they should be encouraged. As I mentioned before, the rural and the natural corridors are straightforward to map, and we anticipate they'll remain largely unchanged in the foreseeable future. Both feature limited access intersections, preserve their low impact character, but we think it's important to map them because it helps guide appropriate development and in particular to ensure that the surrounding areas remain consistent with their intended rural and or natural contexts. Now, in terms of the settlement or the community types, you're already familiar with the TNDs and with the villages too. An example of a village is, for example, Hammock Bay or Origins. Example of TND, of course, is as you see here, Rosemary Beach. Both may include a mix of uses and residential building types. TNDs tend to be a little more compact and more intensely mixed use. Hammock Bay, for example, is an example of a community made up of several villages, but they isolate certain uses in certain pods. So the commercial is located in one area, and then there are villages of different intensities of development. Both are desirable types. Both are necessary in the county. In contrast, the suburban types are generally less desirable. They often lack sidewalks. They often lack private backyards and are isolated from other uses, sometimes even from other housing types altogether. So while some of this is encouraged, we shouldn't want too much of that. The rural areas, however, are primarily concentrated in the northern part of the county, and those are characterized by large lots that support the traditional rural lifestyles that are very desirable for many people. So while this kind of development will continue, we also think you shouldn't preclude encouraging clustering, and we'll talk about that a little later, clustering in some options in places where you want to conserve open space and provide a little bit of mixed use so that people have walkable access to their daily needs. Because even people who live in these areas, in many cases in the very rural areas, why couldn't they have sidewalks? Why couldn't they have access to, a little corner shop? But generally, those environments are largely expected to remain as they are. So how do you map this? So this is a very complicated chart, and I won't spend too much time on it, but we looked at 4 options moving forward, and I'm going to break it down for you in each of the next slides. Of the 4 potential paths, we're not recommending option 1 or 4, which is the least ambitious and the most ambitious. And while option 2 is viable, it has certain limitations. So our preferred option is going to be option 3, as it offers, we think, the greatest flexibility to you. And county staff, we've presented this to them too, and I think they're aligned with this recommended strategy. So what was option 1? Option 1 is to essentially just make minor adjustments to your future land use and zoning without fundamentally changing the existing system. Essentially just targeting what sometimes we call, code acupuncture or a few fixes. But we think this approach is likely to be the least satisfying for most stakeholders, except perhaps for the developers, which are already very adept at navigating and benefiting from the current system. So we're not recommending it. I mean, you've gone through this process of an EAR. Walton County is an ambitious county, and we think the comprehensive plan update should reflect that. Option 4 is the exact opposite. It's converting your entire FLU framework to place types. While this approach is technically feasible and would yield the most consistent and also predictable outcomes, and we just did this in Orange County, Florida, and it just got adopted, it's also the most complex and time-consuming and could take several years to complete. So given that ambitious scope, we're not recommending this option at this stage. What's interesting about it is that as you take intermediate steps with what we hope will be one that you recommend adopting, you could gradually transition to an eventual FLU map that's replaced with place types over time as the strategy that we're proposing proves effective and is well received and is yielding the kinds of results that you would want to see. Now, option 2 reflects what many saw during last year's visioning charrette, where we were proactively mapping place types into your future land use, either where areas were already trending towards those patterns or where it made sense to. And it was based on the population projections we were working with from the University of Florida. So while it's still a viable approach, it would be relatively easy to assign new place types. What would be difficult is to anticipate what would happen if a developer would want to come forward and want to do a place type that hasn't already been mapped, right? We don't know where people have ideas as to where they want to plan. So we figured we needed a strategy to not only identify where place types occur now, but to give you a mechanism by which you could be assigning it in the future as well. So here's just an example of how we looked at how you could meet the 2040 population targets by assigning different types in different locations. And, the outcomes may vary depending on which types are applied where, which developers want to develop first, how many urban centers, how many urban corridors, how many potential TNDs exist. There are many. So it became too difficult for us to allocate this proactively because we just didn't know enough. Now, the county does believe that there are certain places where they can already assign urban corridors, for example, or even urban centers, because they know of projects that are going to be happening, or people will be coming forward with certain projects. 331 has been identified as a future economic corridor, or actually an economic corridor, so it makes sense to designate some of those areas as urban corridors. But as we began to understand the limitations of this system, we came up with this option 3, which is our recommended approach, which essentially involves adopting a sector map. And that's just a broad brush tool to designate large areas based on their growth potential. So they answer the question of where growth should occur, and they help shape how much growth occurs in each area through the application of the place types. And we propose 3 sector categories. Preservation, which is what are those areas that really need to be preserved, we're not anticipating they're going to change much at all. Maintain, which are those areas that are principally developed, that are healthy, that are thriving, that may see some infill, but not a tremendous amount of change. And then grow. Where are those areas that have not built out to their capacity at all and really have the potential to grow and hopefully to more sort of complete places? Once mapped, we would want the developers to come and propose a range of places. So we didn't want to say any place type anywhere. So what you see here are certain place types allocated to certain sectors. So for example, you wouldn't be able to do an urban center in a maintained sector, right? That would require changing the sector plan, which would require making a comp plan amendment. So we want to make it somewhat difficult. If once the sector map is adopted, it would give community members, it would give you all, it would give Board of County Commissioners an assurance of the intensity of development that's going to go there. And of course, we've aligned the sector types. The sector growth potential has to be aligned with the underlying zoning for the preservation of existing property rights, of course. So we're not recommending any kind of down zoning at all. So that's been mapped. It's our initial rough pass at assigning sectors. Our role is to provide the framework and criteria for this process. It's not to finalize the mapping itself. That's outside of our scope. But that said, you can begin to see the general breakdown. We asked Max from Gridix to begin to put it into his system so that it makes it easier for the county to go and begin to adjust where the maintain and the growth should be applied. The southern area is generally a mix, while the 2 central planning areas are the most likely to experience significant change, and the northern will not change too much at all. You'll ultimately decide how to if you want to allocate more maintain or more grow. That's going to be your collective call, but we all know it has to be consistent with the existing zoning. We're also proposing a few incentive-based strategies to shift development away, of course, from the floodplains and towards the upland areas. And so I'm going to show you examples now of most of them. We don't have time to cover them all, but at least it's going to give you a clear sense of the types and the characteristics that define each of them. So from an environmental perspective, for example, the loss of natural habitat, recreational open space, even agricultural land is one of the most pressing issues we know facing the county, particularly as this low density development tends to spread. The problem with the rural centers is that they have the GC, or the general commercial designation, and it's the same amount of zoning that's allowed there than it is down along 30A. And so, but it makes sense to imagine that the rural centers would have a much smaller development footprint, and a lot of them don't even have infrastructure that's available to them. I mean, at least they're on septic. So what we're trying to do with the idea of assigning rural centers is to encourage a mix of building types where they can be located, and then it would help identify those areas that would need to receive infrastructure rather than spreading it out over a much larger area, and to help guide growth while identifying the land that needs to be preserved. So for each of the building types, there's an understanding of the land, of the building types, that are permitted, as you can see in the bottom right. There's also defining features. So what's the minimum acreage that would be required to get an assignment of the rural center? What's the mobility context in terms of FDOT streets? What's the minimum density and the maximum density? What are the existing zoning categories that would go into it? And what is the mix of zoning categories that would be allowed? So that if somebody came to you and wanted to propose a place type, the zoning mix, as you can see here, right here, is parametric, meaning it's not one amount. We want to give a range to give the most amount of flexibility that still fits within the idea of what this place type needs to be. And then it gives an understanding of what the parking requirements should be as well. And then there's an image that shows the character of the place. So a lot of it remains still rural, but we know that where the general commercial is located, nobody's going to want to go put a 4-story building there because the demand's not there. But if it could be spread out a little horizontally with 1- and 2-story buildings with a little green and maybe a fire station or a corner store or a few live work for people who live in the area and want a little workplace, all of that should be made possible, as well as opportunities for maybe a few townhouses or maybe even small multifamily buildings in a very concentrated area, and then the rest remains rural. Conversely, the urban center is the most urban place type that's being proposed for Walton County. Again, the permitted building types are listed on the right. The image above illustrates that potential development capacity. We're not, it's 4 or 5 stories maximum. In this place type, of course, the buildings begin to define the streets and to shape the public spaces. Parking is located behind the structures to preserve this idea of walkable, active frontages. A diverse mix of building types is encouraged: residential, commercial, civic. We've suggested a minimum of 20 acres for a property owner coming forward to do this. The county may decide they want to raise that amount or lower that amount, but the important thing is to have a robust mix of types of building types. These kind of strategies have actually been very effective around the country, and urban centers have developed through public-private partnerships that have been leveraged actually very, very successfully all around the country. And so we think opportunities for this also exist in the county. Now, the corridors, what would those look like? Here we're suggesting 2 blocks long minimum. This is the most urban of the corridor types, of course. Taller buildings placed to the front of the lot to create a more gradual transition to the adjacent low intensity areas, which are often single family neighborhoods. These centers these corridors, I should say, often include a formal civic space like a square or a plaza that's either oriented perpendicular or facing the street to enhance the walkability and the identity of the area. It also would have a relatively diverse mix of building types, mostly retail on the ground floor with commercial or residential above. Again, we're suggesting 2 blocks long. The county may decide it's totally appropriate to allocate it for 1 block long if a property owner comes forward and has a good idea for it at the time. So these are the things that are going to have, those metrics is what's going to have to be tailored when you move forward with the comprehensive plan or the EAR finalization. And then, of course, the suburban corridor. As I said before, you have these, you'll continue to see these, but you may want to minimize suburban corridors in some of your most valuable areas. And additionally, where you do permit them, there's an opportunity to try to standardize the frontage conditions along key streets. So, for example, where is it appropriate to have more than 1 bay of parking? Where should frontage access be limited or shared driveways be encouraged to even begin to support a more walkable place and in a more appealing streetscape, even if the buildings are set back from the street? And it's perfectly okay to set the buildings back from the street when they're on a busy arterial or a busy corridor. But it would be nice to not have 4 bays of parking on one property and then 2 bays of parking in another and then 1 bay of parking in the others. Very often you see it a very effective strategy of setting buildings back behind 1 bay of parking. There may be a frontage street to avoid lots of different curb cuts. It's totally possible to even begin to allocate different intensities of the suburban corridor types. And what's very encouraging to us is that FDOT is rapidly evolving their standards to prioritize not only safety for all the road users, the drivers, the pedestrian, the cyclists, even those using micromobility, the golf carts, golf cart urbanism, we heard that term yesterday for the first time, but to better align street design with the intensity of adjacent buildings and land uses. So they've adopted a transect framework, which is essentially recognizing that the character of the streets are calibrated or tailored to the uses that are along it. So they recognize that there are natural environments, they recognize rural street types, they recognize suburban residential street types, commercial residential street types. So what's here would be your suburban, this would be your suburban village, this would be your suburban corridor, and then anything from this point on becomes urban general, urban center. You don't have the urban core, you don't have super high tall buildings. But you would note that when there's an urban center being designated, the street type should look like what FDOT suggests it should be, right? Parking on the street, et cetera, et cetera. And then lastly, the settlement types or the community types. You already have, as I mentioned before, the rural settlements. We're simply proposing the option of rural clustering in exchange for preserving open space in perpetuity. Now, we think a slightly higher density could be allowed at those centers to support features like the corner shop or few live-work units, to create also a more sustainable and community-oriented rural pattern. And as you can see here, the existing zoning is calibrated to the type, 40 acres minimum, no minimum for density. There's a maximum of 5 dwelling units per acre over the entire area. And then, of course, the village settlements. Development patterns have been improving, like with St. Joe's Origins or Hammock Bay, which showcase that they can have walkable villages that are thoughtfully designed, even if they have a more limited mix of building types, more limited mix of housing types. Even if they're segregated into pods, they tend to have sidewalks, they tend to have connected open space. It's not bad at all. And you want to encourage the movement from the suburban types to at least the village types. And in a few cases, of course, when you have developers coming forward wanting to do TNDs, but we know those are very difficult to achieve. And then, so here's the suburban settlement type, of course. They don't need to be mapped. We recommend that the county avoid permitting these indiscriminately. This is what community members tend to come out and object, because it's just it doesn't enhance the life of the people around them. It just, all they think about is it's additional density, it's additional traffic, it's not doing anything for us. But however, we think that once a certain acreage has been assembled, a mix of building types should be required to ensure that you have at least a diversity of community types. You shouldn't have 40, 50, 60 acres coming forward to you with one building type assigned to it. It's just not healthy. It's economically fragile. It creates monocultures. So it should be, we're not saying you should preclude it, but we're saying you should encourage a greater mix of types. And then the TND, of course, you know it's the most urban of the community types, such as Rosemary Beach. They allow for the highest density in your code. They allow, and they require a very high quality, walkable public realm to support the idea of more livable communities. Of course, this is what we spend our life doing, designing these kinds of places. We know there's not enough of them. That's why they become so expensive. And we know that in many places and in many counties, development is trying to trend towards this. As I said, it's not easy to do. Not every developer wants to do it, but for those who want to do it, they should be encouraged to do it. So here's a comparison of the various settlement types and community types, illustrating the different range and mix of residential types allowed within each place type. And this is done to assure that there are choices for all types of lifestyles. So it's not about saying, you can't do this or you can't do this. It really expands the range of building types, but within an understandable framework of where you're looking to encourage growth, limit growth, prevent growth. And before I turn it over to the transportation folks, I'm going to show you how we've played this out. So we have a conversion chart in our report, which essentially outlines the existing flu categories alongside the corresponding permitted place types and the zoning districts that are allowed in each. Each place type is also linked to the appropriate sector. We have made a recommendation to develop a form-based code specifically for those who want to avail themselves of place types, because it's not going to be required, to ensure that there's a more predictable and consistent built outcome, as opposed to each of them coming forward with their PUD or their design guidelines, which tend to usually say the same thing. Why not have a very simple form-based code as a basis, as a starting point anyways, that can create that level of predictability? We think your zoning code needs it. And then what we did this to illustrate the development scenarios. each designed to accommodate the same projected population and number of residential dwelling units, but it's to give an understanding, and especially for the community who are afraid of the growth because of all the discomfort that comes along with it. The key difference in how we allocated this is we said, okay, in the first scenario, it's going to be business as usual. Scenario one assumes 80% of the land is approved for of the future development is in the form of single-family homes, and 20% is in all the other building types. So that would require, if you did all that, it's going to use up only an additional 5.7% of the county's land. Scenario two shifts that and says, no, we're going to be more aggressive in terms of limiting the amount of single-family homes to only 15% and encouraging 85% in the other housing types. A lot of the missing middle, a lot that is that you're trying to encourage in your comprehensive plan by allowing for smaller building types, etc. That would only use 2.4% of the land. One thing I failed to mention, but it's important to consider, is that once you take out Eglin Air Force Base, all the agricultural land, all the state and conservation parks, which are wonderful, you've done a very good job of preserving a lot of open space, you're left with only 22% of land that could actually be developed. So how that land gets developed is super important, because it's not, you're not looking at a tremendous amount of development coming here. But in any case, this is aimed to show the implications of allowing more of one type versus more of another, and how you can begin to balance thoughtful planning in a way that can achieve the growth that is still going to continue to come here, with preserving land as well and continuing on that path. And so I'm going to end on a few of our housing recommendations. So each of us are, in the EAR report, you will see that there is where we're encouraging new housing policies altogether, and then certain recommendations that may not need to be policies at this stage. So for example, we're suggesting that you really examine your zoning code to make sure, are you encouraging the missing middle housing types that are very clearly defined in the intent of each of these zoning categories. And then we're making certain recommendations, some of which we know are highly controversial. One of them is to consolidate the residential zoning categories where they make sense. The other one is to say, in order to preserve neighborhood character, you should consider the reduction of height of single-family homes from 50 feet to 40 feet or 3.5 stories. We don't know of any other county in the country that allows single-family homes to be 50 feet. And we know that it's causing tremendous friction and angst in the existing neighborhoods, and it doesn't take away development capacity. You can still achieve the same amount of capacity, but maybe you see, if neighborhood communities, if individual neighborhood associations come forward actively requesting this, it may be something worth considering. We know it's controversial. The other thing we know is somewhat controversial, but Mark Davis, our attorney, has said he thinks this is worth exploring. It's not, we asked him, is this legal? To consider reclassifying certain single-family homes that have 5 bedrooms or more. You may decide it's 7 bedrooms, 8 bedrooms, 9 bedrooms, that are used as short-term rentals for more than 6 months a year as commercial buildings, because fundamentally that is what they are. And then in terms of future land use, this is where most of our recommendations are coming in, at least on behalf of, in terms of planning. We're recommending, of course, to adopt the sector map, to encourage rural clustering, to incorporate the place types, to evaluate the adoption of a TDR program. That's a transfer of development rights, there are certain areas that shouldn't develop, and they have very little development capacity assigned to them. So if there was a system by which that property owner could transfer the development rights to the corridors where you want to encourage growth, or to an urban center, that should be explored. We do think, and we know this is controversial, that you should increase the maximum permitted density to encourage certain place types. It's certainly not a lot, but for example, in your general commercial, the development's limited to 17 units an acre, which doesn't allow for housing above retail. That's why very few people do it. It's just not feasible. And so it's a shame not to encourage where you have those commercial areas to have residential above. If so, we're not recommending you go above 30 units an acre, but if you recognize that a TND is a good type, there are certain places that have zoning for the 17 that could go to 30 units an acre. In exchange for those place types, you already do it for affordable housing, you give density bonuses. You could imagine doing it for other sort of public benefits that could be provided for the county, whether it's additional open space, whether it's infrastructure enhancement, but something that works for the county. And then the last one is recreational recommendations. We've begun to identify an open space map to look at where are the open spaces located in the county, how, and to really separate those conservation and the state parks with the active recreational needs that the community needs as it begins to grow. The county already has the new, the 2,000-acre park that's coming to the north. There's the amphitheater that's coming, near the Chad Holly area. So there is already some plans for these open space types. But it's kind of nice to see, to begin to see this map and where those areas are needed, so that if there's a deficiency of an open space type, it could help you as you begin to allocate, to say, if we're going to give additional density, we could tell a property owner, well, you need to provide open space here. And then last but not least, for projects over 20 net developable acres who seek a place type designation, to ensure that at least 5% of the open space is provided in the form of usable open space, such as playgrounds or plazas or greens or community gardens, not sort of dribbled in the back of homes in a way that cannot be enjoyed by the entire community. And then a few other recommendations. And so I know that's a lot, but I'm going to turn it over now to Alex, who will walk you through the transportation recommendations.
Awesome. Thanks, Marina. I appreciate that. So we took a look at Walton County from a few different aspects of the transportation network. We broke it into essentially 3 different buckets of traffic operations, the multimodal network, and safety. So we did notice that there is a concern of increasing roadway congestion on the network, as well as delays at intersections. One of the key factors in the analysis is that most of the major facilities within the county are state roads. So that partnership and that consistency with FDOT standards is what we see as important as we move forward with making recommendations. FDOT, as Marina mentioned before, has a complete streets policy that really aligns with land use and is really one of the leaders in the nation in terms of having that type of framework to make sure that the roadways are in compliance with what the land use is around. So we're very happy with those standards, and you see that as we go into some of the recommendations. From the multimodal perspective, we've got, like Marina mentioned, there's a lot of recreation and rural opportunity within the county, and there is already a robust network of trails and shared use path connections that we want to make sure and emphasize and take advantage of that network by expanding it, looking at consistency and gaps, and then also enhancing park and ride services and, microtransit, dealing with the low-speed vehicles, golf carts, and some of the opportunities down on the beach side. Next slide. So from a safety perspective, like I said, we took a county-wide analysis. This does include county and state facilities and then within the jurisdictions as well. And Walton County does have an increasing trend over the last 10 years of fatalities and serious injuries. We did look at 2024 fairly recently, and we're right about the same between 22 and 23, seeing that increase basically continue. This data comes from Signal 4 Analytics, which is the official repository for traffic safety data, which includes crashes. It does not include near misses. Those typically are very difficult to capture in terms of safety data, but these are verified reports with Florida Highway Patrol and all of the responding law enforcement agencies within the county. So you do have a pretty good cross-section of what is going on when you pull this data. And some of the items that we've seen are definitely the vulnerable user challenges between mostly bicycles and pedestrians, and we're seeing a lot of that down on the beach side, but also a good amount up in the north area of the county as well. When you get these corridors that have more rural characteristics and have those higher speeds, you're seeing that the severities of these crashes are much higher because of those higher speeds, or you get vehicle nighttime conditions where there isn't as much lighting up in those rural areas than there would be down in the urban or suburban areas that have lighting. So lighting is a big countermeasure that's been focused on by DOT and is part of a lot of the safety mitigations. That it sometimes isn't necessarily that the lighting working and illuminating where we want it to be. We're illuminating those pedestrian crosswalks and the mid-block crossings for wherever they're at within the county. There are some on 30A and Scenic Gulf Drive that are within the county's purview. So DOT has done a great job at making sure that those types of mitigations are put in place, and we see that the county has an opportunity to also follow suit. There's a lot of great things that have been implemented already, and we'd like to see that continue. Next slide. So jumping into a few of the more detailed policy recommendations, we wanted to get the comp plan a little bit more robust on the safety side of things, and the best practice for this is to develop a Vision Zero action plan. This essentially is a comprehensive plan that puts safety at the forefront for all modes, all users, and the impetus is that are those increasing fatalities and serious injuries on the network. Similar to FDOT's Target Zero policy, those plans kind of fall under that policy for Target Zero. Essentially, DOT's goal is zero fatalities and serious injuries on the network. There are going to be crashes, but if we can minimize those severities of crashes, we can eliminate those fatalities and serious injuries on the network. So as I mentioned before, lighting is a big emphasis area that is relatively low cost solution, as well as pavement markings, signage, some other low cost solutions that have been implemented. And typically there can be funding associated with some of these safety projects. District 3 administers some of the grants for local agencies as well that can assist, especially on what we call the high injury and fatality network within the state. And these aren't limited to state roads. These funds can be applied to some of the local and county roads if they meet certain requirements in terms of crash rates and whatnot. And this is meant to be an achievable plan. We always recommend that when a municipality is starting with one of these plans, they set small goals. We want to reduce crashes by 10% overall crashes, and make measurable improvements to get to that point. Are we gonna focus on lighting? Are we gonna focus on signage? Are we gonna focus on some bigger ticket items? If you have a location that has issues with pedestrians crossing, is grade separation an option on the table? Those are the kinds of things that you would look at as longer term solutions, but there are many short-term and low-cost solutions that can be applied that FHW supports. Next slide. So the next one, staying on the theme of bicycles and pedestrians, like I mentioned before, there's a robust network already in place, and there is the potential to expand that network. So we do see this active transportation plan as being a big impetus for ecotourism and just quality of life within the county, but also being consistent with the corridors that are already existing for transportation and integrating that into the mobility plan that has established mobility hubs of all different sizes, and making sure that that's consistent with the land use and other elements of the plan that Marina mentioned as well, to encourage walkability, and then also some of the micro mobility elements that we're seeing both on the roadways and then on the sidewalks and shared use paths. Next slide. The next one, big topic, obviously more so on the beach side, comprehensive parking plan. The county has obviously multiple locations where there's parking available on the beach side, and just putting that together as an organized and cohesive plan to not only locate these facilities, but also look at future expansion or future park and ride, making sure the shuttle service and any future transit is connecting these areas in the way that the community needs it. This is both for locals and tourists. If you have vehicles on the roadways that can't find a place to park, they're just congesting the roadway, and we see a lot of that on 30A specifically, but also on Scenic Gulf Drive. If we can get those vehicles either to a park and ride facility or to wherever they desire on that beach side, even if they have to walk a little further, giving that info to them, either through an app or some sort of signage out on the roadways, like we're seeing with event management. They have signboards that basically tell you, hey, this parking lot is full, try this one, and we'll shuttle you over. Things like that can be considered by the county, and incentivizing those local businesses that offer jitney service and other access to some of these urban centers on the beach side as well. Next slide. So the last overarching policy that I wanted to bring up was the comprehensive transit plan, and this is to integrate into the mobility hubs as part of the transportation network. The mobility plan does have a great outline already of where these locations should be placed, and we did make sure that these two potential transit demonstration services on the beach side were consistent with that and could eventually branch out to these areas. Obviously, this is more focused on 30A, but there is potential to expand this out to US 98 on the west side, and then also Scenic Gulf Drive, as well as points north. But we do, based on all the research and development that's been done in this space to date, it really seems like the beach side is the first place to go to establish that ridership base, and then expand from there with other opportunities as they see fit. We also did look into some more non-traditional transit services. This is big in some of the more rural areas of the Carolinas and in other areas of the Midwest, where services are more on demand, and that may be an option for the central and north part of the county to provide that service, but also be mindful that if your ridership is low, you're not having empty vehicles driving around. So that's definitely a consideration in terms of developing this sort of policy. Next slide. A couple of the detailed recommendations that I wanted to just touch on really quick. These are part of larger policy recommendations, but we really thought that one of the big ones was to designate these priority corridors. There's already some established language and reasoning in terms of these corridors being identified for either development or other sort of important characteristics, as well as economic corridors. So we thought it was very important to make sure and get these corridors designated so that the county can then go and do further assessments to set up corridor management plans, which can include, it typically starts with transportation, but then can wrap in all of the other elements that are important for making sure utility services and other infrastructure is part of the overall goal in this area. And what does that road what do we want that road to be when it grows up, especially the county facilities? What is that look and feel that you want? Like for the most part, along Scenic Gulf Drive in 30A, we know that in the future that's not necessarily going to expand to a 4-lane facility or a 6-lane facility. And these plans can establish that context, and this goes hand in hand with the complete streets approach that FDOT has with that context classification. What do we want to see as far as roadways, and what do we not want to see too? That's just as important as what you want to see in the future for these facilities. Next slide. And I'm going to end with the big one here, considering some of the new facilities that have been either identified in the very, very early planning stages. Some of these facilities have had more work done than others in terms of developing their actual corridor and their impacts, and various elements of feasibility and planning studies that have been done before to bring up in terms of traffic relief and traffic congestion relief at some of the intersections as well. What are those additional facilities that the county wants to eventually undertake as part of their network expansion? And most of these are south of the Bay. We do have this one that would be a little bit more of a north-south connector. And I bring this one up specifically because 331 is the only north-south over the Bay, and that is considered an evacuation route and can be a choke point for emergency services. If we don't have that 331 bridge open, you're essentially going to neighboring counties to be able to get north and south. So it's much more long-term in terms of having that north-south connector to get around the Bay, but we do feel that is an important resilience project that will need to be considered by the county as we move forward. And then some of the other ones south of the Bay have been studied at length to relieve congestion on some of the parallel facilities that we wanted to include here and give to the county as their attention. So. With that, I will go ahead and pass it over to Aaron Cook, who's going to go through capital improvements and infrastructure.
Thanks, Alex. So just to start off this section, it'll be a big picture overview. Infrastructure supports civilization, civilization supports infrastructure. If you don't have tax base to support your water and sewer and your transportation system, you're going to have fiscal problems. And so the big point of most of our recommendations is to match the intensity of your infrastructure investment to the level of development. This ties in really well with all of the place types conversation Marina already talked about, ties in really well with the corridor management plans that Alex talked about. But that's the big picture for these recommendations. Next slide. So apologies for the formatting somehow got changed up somehow. But when you have a high development intensity, you can support a high level of infrastructure investment. If you have a low development intensity, then you can have a low investment in infrastructure, but there's also fewer people that are being supported by that infrastructure. Where we have problems is where we either have a lot of development and not enough infrastructure to support that development. So we get problems that either there's minor problems like having to sit through 2 cycles of light at a traffic light, to more immediate health and safety concerns with water and sewer infrastructure. Next slide. And then in the top right, if you have a lot of very expensive infrastructure with very few people actually supporting that, you're spreading that burden across a few people, and so you end up with fiscal problems. In the lower left, you end up with physical problems, but in the top left and bottom right, that's tied to growth areas or preservation areas where you have either a lot of people and a lot of investment, or few people and an appropriate level of investment. Next slide. So for the overall existing conditions, Walton County has several policies that address infrastructure needs. It's concurrency with development. And these recommendations build on that concurrency to drive that matching level of development. Utility services are provided by entities other than the county for water and sewer. And so coordination with county planners and those entities has to occur before any rational coordination with developers can occur. And so that's another tie-in to what these recommendations are going for. Next slide. So for capital improvements, first off is to just make a capacity constraints and opportunities map. This should help inform future areas of growth, conservation. There are existing, so many taps available in existing water systems, and so many million gallons per day at the sewage treatment plant that, it's at this level and you can support up to this much or up to a greater amount. And so just creating that map will give a lot of clarity for developers and for the county and directing this growth. And so when you have an area that you can clearly see that there's no limited no services, or the services are at nearing capacity, more justifiable approach to say to someone coming to the county saying, let's develop this parcel, to have them bear a greater cost, or to determine that you probably should go to somewhere else within the county to develop. And this ties in very much with the growth and manage and preservation sector map. This is to inform the next round. Next slide. So there is a 5-year plan, capital improvements plan, in the comprehensive plan now. It's hard-coded in there, and so this recommendation is to pull that out, make it its own living document that's updated every year, have it be a coordinated effort with the county departments to make sure that the capital improvements plan is up to date. It is coordinated with transportation, coordinated with all the other infrastructure investments, or all the other infrastructure investments over time. Next slide. And then the next policy recommendation is to prioritize capital funds in areas with a greater return on public investment. So either that means that there's a large current population, or there's future population in a desired growth area. But this is also secondary to any objective prioritization of projects, meaning you should maintain what you have now before you go and build out new systems just to provide connections to new growth areas. Next slide. And because of the situation where your water and sewer systems are provided by different providers that are not the county, having a policy to support coordinate efforts to either provide an ecological benefit. So for example, areas that have septic system service, to expand the ability to provide that effluent to a centralized treatment plant, make sure that water going into the bay is treated properly, and to reduce the amount of infiltration from septic and leach fields would be one area. And then another area would be to be collaborative in providing that service to growth areas. So making sure that when the utility providers are expanding service, they're expanding in areas that line up with where the planned growth areas are on the sector improvements map. Next slide. So on infrastructure, which is related, there's several entities that are doing lots of good work in the area related to infrastructure, housing, the water quality in Shakawatchee Bay. And so this recommendation is to just have improving water water efficiency and water usage within homes, agricultural best practices with the local extension office of the University of Florida. These are all potential items that should be partnered with to provide these public resource efforts and best practices and avoid duplicating efforts. Next slide. In the comprehensive plan, there's a clause for having a goal to connect more units to central water and sewer systems to improve the water quality. And so this emphasis needs to reflect on feasibility for making sure that there's a cost-constrained approach for going forward on that. And then finally, second to last, including mechanisms such as development or reimbursement agreements. So if someone is developing some infrastructure, if they install, say, a water or a sewer line, you know that there's future growth possible in the area. Having them install a larger line that allows for future growth, and then making sure that there's a reimbursement agreement so that further developer can reimburse the first one for installing that first line. That will reduce the total amount of capital expenditures. It will reduce the total cost of development going forward, and it'll make it so you only have to tear up streets one time. Next slide. And then finally, there's a recommendation to make a map. There's a current policy to protect high recharge areas, like areas that are feed the groundwater and the aquifer tables. And in coordination with the Florida Water Management District, this recommendation is to develop a map of where those areas are, so it's a lot more clear to both the county who's regulating development and developers where these areas are and where these additional ecological restrictions would apply. I think that's next slide. I think that's it. So I'll turn it over to Giorgio for Conservation Coastal Management.
Thank you, Aaron. So the updated conservation policies strengthen the protection of the wetlands, floodplains, and natural habitat. These changes respond to the growing development and climate changes, basically in the hydrology as well. And they update and provide more stricter mitigation standards, expanded green infrastructure, and incentive-based strategies that promote long-term preservation. And the next slide. We will briefly summarize the changes. And basically, the purpose was to provide a comprehensive framework to advance ecological resilience and sustainable development. We modified the existing policies to reflect the updated scientific understanding and regulatory best practices, and particularly to update them with respect to both, to regulation and to also the science. The objectives of these changes were mainly to strengthen the wetland protection, clustering and mitigation standards, and to preserve the hydrological function of the wetlands. And since this is one of the important aspects for conservation, we also introduced changes to the policies that emphasize the resilience to climate change, potential increase of rainfall intensities through adaptive stormwater management. And the objective was to promote environmental stewardship via education, monitoring, and interagency collaboration. We also looked into developing several new policies which address the transportation, mining, the building efficiency, and canopy preservation, canopy and tree preservation. Next slide. With respect to mining regulations, this is a new policy that emphasizes on the need to protect the environment by multiple steps. We have a document that provides much more details, but the purpose in general was to mandate best practices for erosion control, habitat restoration, and reducing or not allowing air or water quality emissions. These will require environmental impact assessments before mining approval, mandate ecological stewardship, and long-term rehabilitation plans. And also they require regular monitoring and compliance reporting. The next slide. Another new policy is the green building leadership. The purpose is to adopt energy efficient and green building standards in the county, or to expand them, and continuously to expand them, utilizing LEED or similar certifications, and also this would be accomplished by public education, adoption of sustainable construction methodologies, and that would be also, for this will be necessary also to do quite a bit of public education and awareness, and also staff support will be needed as a resource for the green building implementation. The next slide. One of the important aspects was the tree protection ordinance, which currently is missing. The purpose is to adopt a county-wide protection ordinance to regulate removal, encourage replanting, and maintain the canopy cover. Particular emphasis is on having the native plants and native trees within the county. And so that is something that should be continuously should be implemented and monitored. That was also one of the complaints or concerns of the residents, that there is no really a tree protection ordinance. The next slide. We also discussed the incentive-based conservation strategies and the ability to give opportunity to a developer to increase either the density or to increase the housing within certain areas by not building on the wetlands and floodplains. For example, by allowing more units to be built on the available land without building on the wetlands. And there's additional details. We provided this as one of the policies. We believe that will promote long-term ecological and community benefits. And that's also the important factor, because the wetlands are really, the floodplain should not be encroached and modified. And next slide. In terms of coastal management, we basically preserved the existing policies, and we strengthened the existing policies with additional information to address challenges such as the sea level rise, stronger storms, and continued increase of the development and the densities. The updated policies enhance protections for the dune systems, improve flood resilience, and ensure responsible coastal development. And these were also, they also reflect the concerns of the residents during our meeting and discussion with them. And next slide. So we don't have really new policies, but we strengthen the existing policies. The purpose is for these modifications was to reflect the need to enhance shoreline setbacks and prohibition of hardened shoreline structures. And we also believe that considering water quality improvement will be done by mandatory central sewer connection for new developments in coastal watersheds. Also, we address stronger native vegetation protection and invasive species removal, and expanded public engagement through the Coastal Dune Lake Advisory Board. We addressed also the need for sustainable marina development with habitat protection, and particularly pollution controls. They are a strong source of pollution within the coastal areas. We addressed also the need for emergency shelter access, improve the emergency shelter access, and post-disaster recovery planning, since these are some of the most important aspects by being in the coastal areas that subjected to frequent hurricanes and extreme events. And additionally, we looked into protection and restoration of the beach-induced systems. Again, this is a brief summary but there is quite a bit of new information that's provided in the report that we have submitted. And again, the purpose is to provide a broad overview of the policies they're not specific for a single area. They're more applicable for the entire set of for the entire county, and details. While they do not provide the details will be addressed through the Land Development Code. And the next slide.
Now it's me wrapping up.
Okay.
Thank you. So I've got just a couple of slides to continue to say. So we work with a company called Urban 3 that's not present today, but they looked at the fiscal productivity of the land, and of course, this is not going to come as a shock to you that the most valuable land, of course, is along the waterfront, but they also looked at the productivity of the land north of 98, and what this is intended to show is there are financial implications to development choices that are made. So the county can think of development patterns like crops. Each one of them has a different yield per acre, right? And so what this begins to do is give you an overview of the yield or productivity for the different development choices that are made. And they equalize it by looking at it at a per acre basis to really be able to compare apples to apples and to understand the development potential and the future revenue that the county can get based on the development that's permitted. Here's a quick slide that shows the tax revenue per acre per building type to help determine what you want more or less of. It's not to say that you have to have mixed use everywhere, because it's not appropriate everywhere, but it's you want more of the types of places that are going to be more productive for you, and less of the type of places that aren't as productive for you. And so what we ask them to do is and this is a bit of a complicated chart, and it's my last slide, but it's to extrapolate the existing values and to display the range of potential property values or tax base that can be expected from the different settlement patterns, whether it's a corridor, a center type, or the community types that range from the most rural to the most urban, so that as you set the direction for your future, you can keep in mind the balance of potential public revenue from development and the cost to provide those desired services as well. And that is my last slide. So I will stop sharing so that we can then answer any questions you may have. And we know it's a lot of information. So thank you for bearing with us.
Marina, thank you. I will say a couple things. I did want to introduce Mark Davis to you all, some of you. know him, others may not, but he is here as the one of the sub-consultants for DPZ in this effort. I know based on the last meeting that many of you have concerns about some of the recent legislation. So I just wanted to make sure that you all know that he's here, and he may have some opinions and other things on some of those items. So I don't know if the board would like to hear from some of the public folks that are here, or if you all have questions that you want to ask up front, or how you would like to proceed, but it's up to you all.
I'm sorry, any comments from the commission? Questions, answers?
Yeah, I have some questions, but
Questions. Do we want to do our questions first? Do we want to hear from public first?
How many members of the public do we have?
I think 3,
3?
if I'm not mistaken.
So I hope you're not too crowded back there. Yeah, I think that would be better. Go ahead.
Marina, this is the 4th time I've seen an iteration of these charts, so I'm familiar. I've been, I think, on the entire path with you since the beginning. I noticed, though, this time around that there are zoning categories, and this is based on the new legislation. Are we going to be able to condense those zoning categories? Because I know that was one of the things that you felt was a real challenge for us, that we had, 30 some, and I think the initial was to reduce it to like 15. I don't remember the exact. Are we going to be able to do that, or is that something that we're just going to have to work with what we currently have right now with the current sector maps and place types?
Well, so 2 answers to that. The first one is there's not a tremendous amount of consolidation that can happen, but there is some that's already been proposed. I don't know off the top of my head, which ones are proposed to collapse into others, but we have made that recommendation, and I could pull it up, I guess. But it's really what we did is we looked at, through the mapping that Gridix was able to do for us, what are those areas that really only have 1 or 2 where only 1 or 2 parcels have a certain designation, and those we've recommended that be folded into what actually is reflected on the ground. We don't think it's going to be very hard for you to consolidate some of them, and of course, in particular, it has to be some that at least have the same density and at the same FAR, generally speaking. What's going to be more challenging is what are and that's not part of the scope, of course, is the how your zoning code can change to better accommodate some of these, or to be better aligned, I should say, to some of your comprehensive plan policies. Now, in terms of the place types, the way we're proposing this would work out is if there's an area that, so for example, property owner comes forward and has some neighborhood infill, some small neighborhood, some neighborhood preservation, and even a little bit of town center, let's say, for example, we would tell the county, take a look at the entire area. What's the development capacity of all those parcels if you were to aggregate them? And then let's say in total, it would allow for 200 units. I'm just throwing out a number. Then you allow them to distribute it in a way that makes the most sense. Now, certain place types, we're encouraging a slightly higher density in order to incentivize and activate some of these place types. But the idea is that you would be taking all these disparate zoning categories and aggregating them in a way that actually does make sense.
I wanted to touch on that just a bit too, because it seemed like you might be kind of focusing on the idea of Senate Bill 180 and how we would proceed with these changes. Mm-hmm. So, and Mark or whoever can approach this as well and correct me if I say something wrong, but I think the main focus of this is the idea of being more burdensome, right? So if we are seeking, and we may, as part of some of this activity, to reduce our zoning districts and combine some of them, it would be our task to ensure that whatever we change, any property we change, we would not be taking away any entitlements. We would be adding to or keeping them the same. So, and I think that can probably work.
I don't know if that's Stephen speaking, but I think it is.
It is.
Sorry, but I think that's exactly right. What this is intended to do is really augment the options that you have, because you're not going to be, unless the county chooses to go in this direction and to proactively map certain areas where place type should be allocated, you're only offering this as an option to a developer who has property in a certain, in the growth sector, for example. They could avail themselves of certain one of these place types. It's not, it wouldn't be, at this stage, we're not recommending that it be required. It's just an option. But hopefully it's attractive enough that some of them would want to do it.
Okay.
So we don't see it as a burden, as burdensome as what SB 180 is beginning to define.
What about the suggestion to have the larger homes be commercial designation? Is that not more burdensome? Okay. Okay, that's what I thought.
Well, yes, because there would be a whole new different set of rules. And by the way, the legislation is not just about density and intensity.
Oh, I
in our
know, I've
opinion.
read it.
It's also about process, so you can't increase, the opinion is amongst land use attorneys in this across the state is you can't increase how you go about getting a certain development order done. So, yeah, we're going to, obviously the staff, we've been looking literally almost at every parcel with this plan to see if that's the case, because we may have to, if you choose to adopt it this way, we may have to take things out that aren't, you know, that would violate SB 180. We're very conscious of what it is. Now, here's my opinion. It's a horrible overreach by state government, but that's just my opinion.
That's also my opinion as well. I share that with you.
For those of us who haven't found and read the bill, can you summarize what it seems to say relevant to us?
I will tell you a little history if you want to know a little history, because it'll make you understand what it really is about. So after, oh gosh, I always forget hurricane names, after one of the larger hurricanes in Central and South Florida that really caused a significant amount of damage to single-family residential homes in Fort Myers area, that part of the state, the local government there, some of the local governments there, some of the cities and counties, significantly increased development standards for houses that have been destroyed. There was some good idea behind it to make those houses less vulnerable to storms, hurricanes, damage when it happens. But quite frankly, it drove the cost of reconstruction up fairly dramatically. The development community in that area, the insurance lobby, convinced the legislature to pass a bill we refer to as Senate Bill 180 that essentially says a look-back period, by the way, to August of 2024. If your county was under a state of emergency, and I'm paraphrasing, so forgive me, but if your county was under a state of emergency, you cannot pass or have a new regulation that increases the burden on an individual piece of property, intensity, density, or development burden. So it essentially preempts local government from doing anything to increase the burden on a piece of property. And by the way, yes, correct. It's in a 3-year period of time. So things like, let me give you a good example. The Seagrove Neighborhood Plan, it increased some burdens on some properties. I'm not sure that the county doesn't have an obligation under the statute to repeal it. I would also say that the statute provides a private cause of action with attorney fees to an individual who feels like a county has violated the provisions of Senate Bill 180. So it's a fairly powerful piece of legislation. Orange County, by the way, just passed, as Marina just referred to, just passed a fairly large change, a hugely large change in their Comprehensive Plan and Land Development Code. I haven't talked to their county attorney, but I'd like to, because I'd like to hear what he has to say about, what he thinks Senate Bill 180 is going to do to them. So anyway, that's the history. That's how it came about.
Not have 30 days to unwind some of those things, or yeah, okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Did that get passed before or after August 1st in Orange County?
Orange County?
It was
Orange County passed.
about 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, the Orange County Code. Sorry,
Yeah.
Go ahead, please.
is that a question for me?
Yes, Marina, do you remember the day of the Orange County passed the comp plan?
It was before, it was last month, but it was before October, well, obviously before August 1st. It was about a month ago that it got passed.
So that would then probably not be enacted or at least modified.
I need to talk to him to see what.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions about that?
Okay, thank you, Mark.
Sure.
Mr. Chairman, I did have a couple of questions. So one about transportation, good discussion about safety and reducing fatalities and serious accidents and some of the things that can be done. But from what I see, a lot of the problems are caused by increasing volume. And that's not addressed under transportation. You did talk about it in capital improvements and concurrency, but the reality is that we're growing at a very high rate. We've got an increasing budget that doubled over 5 years. Huge increases in the money that's available, but I don't think a commensurate amount of money is going into the transportation network. So I guess my question is one of the viable options to limit development, to keep the roadways from becoming intolerably unsafe, which I believe they are in some locations, and especially in the locations where the roadways are constrained and there's not that much you can do to fix them, no matter how much money you have. So I'd just like to get your reaction to the concept of, which actually was in the concurrency element of the comprehensive plan, to limit development. So is that in your current thinking or not?
I'm going to ask Alex to respond.
Yeah, I mean, we typically, from a transportation perspective, you're absolutely right in terms of when you see those numbers go up, you are going to expect more crashes and incidents. We usually formulate these into incident rates, either per intersection or per roadway segment. Most of the models have a growth rate applied to these facilities that would imply that the capacity or the volumes on these roadways are going to be increasing. So there's a certain level of safety that is implied that the number of crashes will increase, but the biggest aspect is to decrease the severity. Now, on the side of actually limiting growth to limit the amount of vehicles coming on the network, that's not really my purview in terms of what I can answer on that side of the house. But obviously, as you develop, there's a certain number of when we model, say you do a small study area or an intersection or a planned development, and you assess the traffic impact of that location, there's certain numbers and certain criteria that's set forth by FHWA, Federal Highway, and ITE, which is the Institute of Transportation Engineers, and they set forth certain numbers of trips, we call them, in terms of trip generation, and that is all assessed as the developments go through the process of their impact studies. And we would do that at intersections as well, especially when you're looking at traffic operations, to assess what that increase is going to impact, how that increase is going to impact the transportation network from an operations perspective. But as far as limiting, I mean, there's really no public methodology to go about that. I mean, if you have private developments that want to gate their areas, that's the only real way that we've seen it done anywhere in Florida, but that's how the traffic is handled.
Okay, thank you. I've got a couple other questions, but I'll give the other members of the board to ask some questions. I don't want to take up too much time.
Anyone else down here? You have any? I was wondering, do you really think shuttles or public transportation is something that you can make viable in at least the beach community? Because, you know, I don't see somebody getting their family of 5 onto a shuttle with all of the wagons full of beach chairs and other things that I see them walking down there with. Sure.
I was very skeptical as well. My office literally looks at the Grayton parking lot where the shuttle comes in and out. I watch it pretty much all day long. I have been utterly amazed how it's being used. It is used. I get there 6:30 most mornings, and it's filling up. I leave 6, 7 every night. There's still people using it during the season, especially. And it is families, and it's not just people going to the restaurants or whatever down at Grayton. They're going to the beach. I was there July 3rd. People were parked not only in the parking lot, but halfway up to the end of the development part of Grayton Beach, up 293 on the side on the right of way. So I was very skeptical. I was the county attorney when we bought that property. I was skeptical of it ever working as a parking lot and a shuttle, but I will tell you, they are full, especially during the season, all day long. In the off season, the parking lot will stay fairly full. You don't see them parking in the right of way. The parking lot will stay fairly soon, but the hours of busyness is not as long. But I'm telling you, my experience, just this morning, I didn't get there at about 7:15 this morning, and I saw 2 of them go out. You know, it's fairly remarkable to me how many people really are using it. And I'm also curious, and I would love for the county to do a survey to find out where they're coming from. You know, is it just in the Grayton area? Is it some other part of the county where they're coming down there and parking? So anyway, that's just my personal observation on that particular lot.
Yeah, that's all
Let me just
convenience driven also.
Yeah.
There was a time when Grayton Beach people would just endure, you know, trying to find a parking space, but it's gotten bad enough. It has to get bad enough for it to work.
And Grayton Beach it's a very unique experience. I don't think you see that anywhere else on 30A. Yeah, and I mean, having that piece of property there and then having taken out all the parking down at the Red Bar and all that really caused a major issue for parking. And yeah, okay, so yeah, it gets used there, but I don't see that happening anywhere else, say down by Stinky's or somewhere like that.
Yeah. Well, I know they're parking all over at the Stinky's area and east and west of there, the parking on the sides of 30A. Even where the county has planted ornamental grasses, they just drive right over them. It's really sad to see. Okay. And Fred, I guess we're back to you.
Okay, economic development. I think one of the big weaknesses in this county is that we don't have a lot of diversity in our economy. And so I guess the basic question is there anything that we could or should build into our comp plan and land development code to encourage things that would promote attracting business? And I'll give you a couple of examples. Some places have adopted fiber optic networks as a public utility. And, you know, I know that North Walton has a project going on to bring in high-speed internet, but I doubt that that's going to be enough to satisfy somebody that wants to bring a business in, not only for their business, but for the people that work there. I think it's a big limitation for the part of the county where the land is available to do economic development. And I think that's something that should be promoted, and perhaps in this plan, it's something that should be promoted. The other part of that is that I look at other areas like Bay County, for example, has industrial parks. And I know we have industrial parks, but you need to go over to Bay County and see what they have. They've got monumental resources there for, especially for construction. We just don't have that here. And so there's a lot of money that's going to other places because we don't have those facilities. And I don't know that that's something that you could build into the plan, probably not. But I think that that's a big weakness in not highlighting the need for diversifying our economy, because we're one hurricane away from a huge disaster. Everybody knows that, and I don't think that we're doing enough to overcome that.
I have one thing, I guess, the section, I was impressed with the report itself, but one thing I didn't see, and I'm maybe a little confused, maybe you guys can help me out, but, you know, we have an extraordinary number of apartment units going up. We probably got, I don't know what, 2,000-3,000 going up right now, most of them down in the south end. And where in the hell we're going to find people to go in those units, I have no idea. But it just continues. You go down the Highway 98, you'll see another one going up. And it's like, what the heck is going on? And I didn't see that addressed in this report. Maybe it was somehow. But it's spiraling out of control, quite frankly.
So can I address both points that were just made by the gentleman before you and then this one? So the first one about diversifying the economy, I think is, you know, you see how nothing precludes, a lot of the industrial buildings that are going up, you know, other than the big data centers and all of that, can be fully integrated into commercial areas. So you have very, very, very strong property rights. So it's very hard to suggest that a zoning category should transition to industrial, and to like hard, heavy industrial. But it's not to say that the vast majority of the light industrial uses cannot be integrated into the commercial, because it should be, and it can be. What we're trying to do with the recommendation of place types, and because we did hear loud and clear that you do want to diversify your economy, is to allow for a greater mix of uses within these areas. And the vast majority of industrial uses can be accommodated, except for those very, very heavy industrial uses like cement plants and that sort of stuff. So that's number one. Number two, in terms of the apartment units, again, it has to do with the zoning currently permits it, right? Now, we wish it would be more integrated with, you know, some of the more walkable commercial areas that exist right now, because so much of your apartment housing is going up in places that aren't at all in walkable areas, and they're surrounded by parking, and so it doesn't make it particularly pleasant for the people who live there, who then have to get into their cars to go everywhere. So again, with the encouragement of the place types, we're trying to encourage multifamily residential in areas that already permit commercial, and that's why one of the things we are recommending is that you do increase your density slightly in the areas that are zoned commercial, to allow for that multifamily above the residential, and not isolated in pods, which are not as environmentally friendly as they could be. But because you can't quote unquote downzone, if a property already permits multifamily, it's very hard for the county presumably to say no.
I also wanted to add to that sort of idea, right? So we saw an increase in applications for apartments, you know, after 2020, right? Where there was, folks were moving here in droves, and there was a need that was recognized by the market. So we received all these applications processed. Many of them were approved, not all of them. But we're in a position now where these are being built out, and I think some of the developments are finding it difficult to fill all their units. We've seen a slowdown in those type of applications because I think the market has recognized some of that. So, it's like what Marina said, we do have a very strong property rights element here, right? So if someone has the ability to develop an apartment complex and they have research that indicates it's going to be successful, then they're gonna apply. So
Yeah, I understand that, Steve. And then if you got enough money and you want to throw it away, go right ahead and build that 500 unit that you're not going to fill up.
Right.
But that's my opinion.
yeah, well, I think others are holding that true currently. But I think the hope here is that, with the place types and some of these other bonuses that will come along with those increased design standards and things, we'll see when a development comes in with an apartment complex that, retail opportunities and a mix of other housing types potentially and other uses will come with it. And they won't be separated and create, some of these sprawl issues and other things. So.
I'm curious, when you talk about wanting to have more of a village, more walkable, what all do you have to have in that area to make it walkable? Does that require that you have groceries? Does that require that you have a hospital or medical facilities? Because I'm not sure I've ever lived in a walkable community.
So, so no, none of that is required. First, the principal rule the principal ingredient you want for a walkable community is to have a pedestrian-friendly frontages. So what we mean by that are streets that are designed to make people feel comfortable when they're walking on the sidewalk, and buildings that typically are there's a nice space between the sidewalk and the building face. It's not filled with parking because people do not like or enjoy walking along streets that just have parking in front of them. So when we talk about walkable, that's one of the ingredients. The other ingredient, of course, is a little mix of uses. But so I live in a community actually designed by DPZ back in 1988 in the DC area that has that's about 350 acres. The vast majority of it is residential only, and there's a little town center and there's a main street. But the majority of the area is composed of townhouses, single-family homes, and multifamily homes, and a bit of a mix. There are areas for single family, there are areas for townhouses, and then they're also mixed together. You can't force commercial where there's no need for commercial. What you can do is encourage the types of buildings we're hearing that people need. With more people living, working and living at home, there's an increased need for live-work units. But developers are not going to provide something if the market's not there. So we see people who write codes that say, for example, you have to have retail here. We wouldn't require it unless you really know it's on a commercial corridor or something like that. You let the market determine what that mix of uses needs to be. But too often it's precluded in zoning, and that's why it's just not provided. So the idea, again, of the place types is to encourage for those small commercial uses, whether it's live-work units, whether it's a florist or a laundromat or a little coffee shop or a laundromat. Or I said that already, or a nail salon, those kinds of uses that we, like from where I am talking to you in my office, I can walk to those within a 5-minute walk. So even though majority of people are always going to keep their cars, but the majority of Americans take about 10 to 11 car trips a day. If 1 or 2 of those car trips can be by walking or cycling instead of driving, that's a good thing. So a couple of restaurants is nice to have. Right, but a restaurant owner is not going to go there if they know that they can't make ends meet. But the other thing to remember is that the majority of car trips taken are less than 3 miles. Like something like 80% of car trips taken in the U.S. are less than 3 miles, which means that the majority of them, not all of them, but some of them can be done through walking. But we know to encourage a walk, it has to be safe, it has to be comfortable, it's got to be interesting for people to walk there too. So that's principally what we mean by a walkable, by a place being walkable, is to have that walk be pleasant and interesting for people to be encouraged to do that regularly.
Okay. Do you have anything in the transportation plan to keep electric bicycles going 25 miles an hour away from the walkers and the normal bicycles? We have signs that say no motorized vehicles, but in this state, apparently a motorized bike has all the rights of a normal bike.
They really should be in the street, and I'll let Alex address this, and not on the sidewalks. But then it becomes an enforcement issue. Go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, and you're exactly right, Marina. This is definitely dabbling in the side of enforcement. Micromobility is still very much in its infancy as far as policy goes. We're having a lot of the same challenges in the city of Orlando and some of the other beachside communities that we work in as well, with LSVs and with the high-speed scooters and e-bikes and whatnot. It's a big challenge that the county is essentially gonna have to work with law enforcement to figure out what those steps are and how we can mitigate that. There's really, I mean, we are seeing in other places that there are designated right-of-ways for each mode, but it takes up a lot of space. And one of the things we looked at with 30A was how could we accommodate more of these modes in terms of sharing that right-of-way. So, we can suggest it, we can put the signage out, but ultimately it's going to be an enforcement issue. It's sort of the same as the LSVs. We can suggest and we can use maybe technology in terms of geofencing if they're rentals, but when they're micromobility that's owned by an individual, those controls kind of go away. So this is something that's evolving every day. Seeing articles on different areas of micromobility, and so far, it's signage and enforcement are the only mechanisms to really control that.
And in new developments, you can encourage separate paths for that, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, and correct me if I'm wrong, but there are some mechanisms already for distinguishing between class 1, 2, and 3 e-bikes, which have, 20 mile an hour versus 28 mile an hour top speeds.
Yeah.
It's
my understanding that the law permits them to be on the paths, the walking and biking paths. So I'm not sure what enforcement you're going to do, since that's allowed.
Yeah.
It's just
so I think
an odd
between
mix
class
of
2
people.
and class 3 is where you can draw a distinction of these paths can
And
walk class 2 bikes, but these
are
paths
licenses
not, but
required?
You need to. I'm sorry?
Are licenses required for the riders?
Mm-mm.
No.
Yeah, that's what I thought. That would explain the 10-year-olds. So, okay, thank you.
Yeah. And what we've seen in some areas is that the buffered bike lanes have been successful in channelizing some of these motorized micromobility modes, and that has given an avenue to separate them from the sidewalks and the shared use paths.
Yeah, because the bike riders are still going to go where it's most convenient for them as well.
Yep.
So if you offer a bike lane, they're going to want to go there because it's faster than dodging through all the pedestrians. That said, it takes more right of way.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Should we open it up to the public for questions and answers? Yeah, go ahead. We just ask that you come to the microphone and identify yourself. And
No, it's been a long hearing here, but I do have a few things I wanted to get out for everybody and we get some feedback. As far as the e-bikes go, parenting might go a long way. I can tell you that. Anyways, John Genesio, I live in 346 Blaze Boulevard in Freeport. I was a county commissioner in Okaloosa. I have a civil engineering degree once upon a time. Lived here in a long time in the Panhandle. I also had a stint with a job in Ohio where I paid attention to how they did things. I read all the reports. I've been all through Senate Bill 180 more than once. I've been all through the Lev Local Act. So I have some thoughts that are based on some significant research. I think the DPZ presented a pretty good plan, some good thoughts there, chances to correct things that have been lacking. Very unusual zoning, haphazard in places. You know, that was one of the early comments. We have a chance to correct it. Existing encroachments and conflicts. Actual zoning does not yield the same result as the wording in our code. So these are all chances for us really to do things because we're at a turning point. We really are. And if you read some of the articles and even some of the newspaper things. Population, let's take the 125,000 that they're looking at. We're at 5.3 million visitors a year. That's 225,000 average per week, significantly higher. Right now we're at 190,000 average per week. And then of course, 4th of July and Labor Day and Memorial Day, way higher. And it's not just at the beach anymore. Hotels, you know, VRBOs, a whole 9 yards. That population has been dispersed, not just on 30A. 190,000 right now, headed to 225,000. That needs to be accounted for in the planning. Talking about economic development, one thing that places that have been successful with it in the industrial parks is you have, number one, transportation access. You got to have a major highway, a major rail line, interstate access very nearby. You got to have ready to build land and or buildings that are ready to go. Large buildings, steel frame buildings, hard floors, cranes, the whole 9 yards. They'll come if you build it. Okaloosa has a whole industrial park up by the airport. They've got significant investment there with a lot of aerospace companies. They just opened up the Shoal River Ranch. They're going to do the same thing. An industrial park is not about cement plants and asphalt plants. Okay, it's about wealth creating and sustaining jobs. Aerospace, manufacturing, you know, you pick one, but it's not an asphalt plant, it's not a cement plant. That just helps us build things. So when you talk about economic development and economic development zones, think about transportation, think about access to the roads, where you're going to get there, who's going to work there, and having the land and the facilities there that people come in. Companies want to come in. I work with companies all the time. We just did a whole survey of bringing some manufacturing for different things. Got to have buildings, got to have them ready to go. They want to come in and they want to be there in 3 months, 6 months. They want to be able to move in because the government is awarding contracts. They're going to hire 200 people, whatever. That's the kind of economic development. Can you have it just sitting there waiting? You know, probably not. But can you have a plan to get there? Maybe. Maybe. Economic development. Somehow you got to work that into the plan. Not recommending any down zoning. I think that fits with the Senate Bill 180. So that's not something you have to, you know, do any kind of maneuvering around. But the Senate Bill 180 was a definite overreach because Escambia, Santa Rosa, Okaloosa, Walton, Bay County, we had none of the issues that they listed. None. Zero. And I talked to Representative Trump or Abbott yesterday. And he said, well, and he's a good guy. He said, you know, in Lee County, their guy had a 2,400-foot house, and he wanted to build a 14. They made him build a 1,400-square-foot house. That's not what it was all about, okay? And it didn't happen here. So I don't know what you can do with the Board of County Commissioners and how they can roll it up to the League of Cities and the Association of Counties. But Senate Bill 180 is bad. It's bad. It's no different than the beach bill. Oh, well, we had the beach bill how long? 2 years ago? 3 years ago? And now they overturned it. The legislature is famous for making bad decisions and then coming back and go, well, maybe we weren't so smart after all. The Live Local Act needs to be included, okay? We didn't talk about that at all. Live Local, guy comes in, he has so many percentage, I think it's whatever it is, 40% or some number. You're not going to get a vote on what kind of density comes in, even though our plan says you have to have the infrastructure before you have development. Our plan is very clear. We spell it out several times, multiple times, about infrastructure being sufficient for the development. You're not going to get a vote. We're not going to get a vote. Live Local is going to be an impact. That also has to be included somewhere in here. The apartments, Owl said, the new one up there, 30% occupied right now. That's what their occupancy is. I don't know what the other ones are. I just happened to go to a meeting the other night, and that's what they had. The transportation, a lot of good stuff, talking about going down on the beach in 98 and moving people in and out there, but Highway 20 is a major transportation corridor that it's broke right now. So anything in our plan has to conclude that. There's not $100 million or $500 million to fix it, but we have to do something. We have to put turn lanes in. We've got to do something with the traffic flow. I know they have plans. We're going to put some passing lanes in, but it really needs to raise the priority on that because these 225,000 people, they're not just all on 98 now. They're going to be in other places. I think those are the biggies, but I just want to make sure that we kind of covered some of those things. The e-bikes, don't get me started on those. They're dangerous, and the kids are going to get killed. They're going to have a sad funeral, and everyone's going to be, oh, little Jimmy, it was so sad. They're driving them, and they're so powerful. They're like jet skis. And, we say the problems you have those with irresponsible operators.
They're motorcycles with 10-year-olds on them.
I drove right in front of me in the parking lot at the general store. I got out of the car. What are you doing? Kid looked at me like, what? I didn't do nothing. And I just, put my preppy old man hat on, got back in the car. As I drive away, there's 6 of them following 2 feet on my bumper on their little e-bikes. It was all I can do not to really put my grumpy old man hat on, but they're a problem. I don't know how that goes into the plan. That's over the side. But transportation, where the investment goes, working with the existing infrastructure for industrial parks, having the code, and really, there has to be in the Senate bill, they're not that clever. Whatever they put in there, have our Atkinson look at it, have our smart people look at it. They're not that clever. There has to be ways that we can do things that we need to do, that how we live here in Walton County. And we're at a tipping point. 10 years ago, no big deal. 10 years from now, who knows? I was glad to see that they added the water. That's a very critical infrastructure. We use right now 16 million gallons a day. 16 million gallons a day based on that population. I don't know how long the aquifer straws are going to last for 16 million gallons, but we certainly can't take any risk on any of our development that is going to impact the access to the aquifer or contamination or anything that works that way. But including the water in there was a good thing, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
I'm glad to hear you talking about manufacturing, because when I look at that chart that showed where all the money generation and value was, well, that whole northern part of the county is exactly what the nation needs. We need to be building the things we consume, and we don't. And we need to offer that, find a way to offer that.
Those are wealth-sustaining jobs.
Yes.
Service sector, good, whatever. But wealth-sustaining, manufacturing, auto manufacturing,
Yep.
car, washing machine. Ohio just put millions of dollars into for Intel.
Yeah.
They just put a $350 million grant to Andrew to build a platform.
Yep.
Sir, do you know that we, our economic development person just resigned? So, do you need a job?
So I work with industries, okay? I work very closely with industries, and I saw how Ohio did it because I had my former county commissioner hat on. I watched how their economic development worked. $350 million for Anduril. Anduril's a $12 billion company already. Came out of nowhere about 15 years ago. They gave them $350 billion to build, it's called affordable mass weapons, right? And they're going to produce them by the thousands. Intel, I think that was $150 million to get them to come with build Intel for the chips and processors. That's incredible investment. Shoal River, let's talk to the county commission over in Okaloosa, talk to Mr. Mixon and whoever. Shoal River Ranch was just nothing. It just sat there, it was scrub pines and whatever, whoever owned it, I'm not sure. Now the county has it and they're making it into an industrial park. It's right there on 90 and I-10. It's very close to the Crestview Airport, 8,000 foot of runway. Those are the kind of things that you have to put into plans. You can't make it happen tomorrow, but 5 years, 10 years, the planning has to happen now. This is when it happens. And the companies are out there, and it's a great place to live. When I lived in Ohio, I had the task to set up the operation, and I worked for a San Diego company. And I got to the point where I had 10 or 15 guys working for us. And I said, okay, now it's time to start bringing some of the San Diego work to Ohio. They said, oh, well, nobody wants to live in Ohio. That was wrong, but that was their thought process, right? They're thinking, Ohio, it's cold there, isn't it? But that's the thought process. Nobody says that about Walton County or this area. People like to live here. They like to come here. Every time you talk to somebody, I used to come on vacation here, and now I live here. Hammock Bay, all my friends and neighbors, I don't know anybody who is a native Freeport person who lives in Hammock Bay. Everybody came from somewhere else because it was like, hey, I came down here in the military, job, vacation. That's a great place. I mean, the whole area is great. Now we have 10 years to keep it great. And this plan will go a long way. We can't be deterred by the state legislature. We have good people. Abbott's a good guy. Trumbull's a good guy. They all get together and they become not good guys, but I'm not sure how that works. But there has to be loopholes in that Senate bill, and there has to be loopholes in the live local. And we've got to push back because a year from now, 2 years from now, it'll be wrong. They'll change it. In the meantime, we can't let those impacts stop us from doing the right thing and smart things. So,
Thank you.
you're welcome.
I'd like to have your card afterwards if you got some. Thank you. Okay, anybody else up here or in the audience? Okay, any more comments from our consultants or from Mr. Schoen?
Once the conversation is finished, I was just going to kind of lay out how this is going to move forward, just for
Okay.
for your own knowledge. But I'll let everybody finish up before I do.
Marina?
No, I was going to say exactly next step. So, Stephen, you take it away.
So what we're going to do is this will be on the board's next agenda in the August, barring any unforeseen circumstance, as really the official start of the review of this EAR report and what will ultimately be the adoption of the report. Once we have that final adoption, staff will work to create the actual text amendments to the comprehensive plan. And we'll move that back through ordinance that we'll have to transmit to the state. And if they approve it, then the board will officially adopt it. Our deadline for that adoption of the text amendments is March of next year. So I think we're sitting in a good spot to get it done by that time frame. So. Marina, do you want to add anything there? There's some other, tertiary sort of meetings with board, county commissioners and those sort of things, but that's really outside of the official process. So.
Okay.
No, yeah, I just wanted to say that we will be, at least some of us will be there in person for the next meeting, which is on August 14th, to present to you again.
That's right. They'll be here in person.
And maybe less presentation and more discussion.
Is the presentation we just saw available somewhere online for us to access?
I have it, and I also have a copy of their recommendation report that I'll ensure that you all get. Marina, will you make sure that Mike has that report available so they don't have to log in and things like that? And then I'll send that link out to you all so you could start reviewing that in depth.
Yeah, Stephen, please wait till tomorrow because there were some formatting issues with Aaron's slides, which have been fixed already. So I'm going to send you an updated one.
Okay, perfect.
Okay.
Thank you.
Is anything else from anyone? Okay. Since this isn't an actual meeting, I'm not sure I need a motion to adjourn.
I think you just get up and leave.
We're done. Thank you.
All right, thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you all.
Thank you, guys.
Goodbye.
It'll be online. It'll be online.
Yeah.
We have a chance
Too much. I think we do. As far as I know, they will. The conceptual plan was approved, so it's just a matter of
Cell phone. And that's my.
Yeah, that would absolutely. I mean, it's perfect for a number of reasons. It meets. I don't know the future of the mobility plan, but that's one of those main sort of. Hopefully we'll see some coming, yeah, they've got time, so.
I mean, I'll fly with a lot of Johnsons and Wilsons.
One.
I know, but they're. I found your presentation because.
So what?
There should be value.
So, Dayton is where our home office is. So I was there. Moved back. I was here from '93 to 2010. 2018, but got to Dayton. Yeah. Back end. That'd be great. Just loss of work. They lost National Cash Register. Lost General Motors. Lost 15 to 20,000. 5-year period. Ohio said we need to bring well-sustaining jobs. They didn't bring back hotels. Incubator hubs. We got Jobs Ohio is they're advertising. Precious metals. We just now opened a mine. California just got Apple. No, Microsoft just invested $500 million in precious metals is a misnomer. They're precious because they're like gold. Plenty of them.
Rare metals.
Yeah.
And
But we try to stay out of politics. I couldn't just stay on the asphalt place. Now we start peeling the onion back.
Every time I call them, they get irritated.
I was interested in water. And I talked to Dan Curry, and I talked to Florida Association of Counties. Why were they not there with all 67 counties? agriculture to